Zero. That is the number of countries that have publicly committed to sending warships to the Strait of Hormuz. Zero. Not one. The United States asked 7 nations by name: China, France, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, Germany, and others. It told them the world's most important oil choke point was at risk. It warned that NATO's future depended on their answer. It said, in the president's own words, "We will remember." And every single one of them said no. That number is what this episode is about, and by the end you will understand exactly why it changes everything. Good morning, I'm James Harlow. Welcome to The Right Chapter, where we connect the world's biggest events to the forces they set in motion. Let me tell you precisely what happened over the past 48 hours, because the sequence matters as much as the outcome. On Saturday, President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that many countries, especially those affected by Iran's attempted closure of the Strait of Hormuz, would be sending warships in conjunction with the United States to keep the strait open and safe. He was specific. He named China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom by name. He followed up aboard Air Force One on Sunday, telling reporters, "I am demanding that these countries come in and protect their own territory because it is their own territory." He gave an interview to the Financial Times in which he said it will be very bad for the future of NATO if member countries fail to police the strait. And in what will likely become one of the most quoted sentences of this war, he told reporters, "Whether we get support or not, I can say this, we will remember." By Monday morning, the responses had arrived. They were unanimous. They were a no. Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi told her Upper House Budget Committee that no decision has been made whatsoever regarding the dispatch of escort vessels. She added that such an operation would be legally very difficult, a reference to Japan's post-war pacifist constitution, which places strict limits on overseas military deployments. Her defense minister was blunter, saying current circumstances did not warrant deployment. Japan sources 95% of its oil from the Middle East. That number, 95%, means the Strait of Hormuz is not an abstract strategic concern for Tokyo. It is a daily operational reality. And still, Japan said no. Australia's Cabinet Minister Catherine King said, "We won't be sending a ship to the Strait of Hormuz." She confirmed that Canberra had not even received a formal request from Washington, directly contradicting Trump's claim that countries were already lined up and on their way. Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul, speaking to reporters ahead of a European Union foreign ministers meeting in Brussels, was measured but unmistakable. Will we soon be an active part of this conflict? No. We will not participate in this conflict. Luxembourg's Foreign Minister Xavier Bettel was less diplomatic. Blackmail, he said, is not what I wish for. He added, "I want to remind that none of us has been directly attacked. There are no grounds to invoke Article 5. The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the strait must be reopened to ensure market stability and then drew a clear line. Let me be clear, he said, that won't be, and it's never been envisioned to be, a NATO mission. The UK would not be drawn into the wider war." The EU foreign ministers, meeting collectively in Brussels on Monday, decided against expanding their naval operations in the Hormuz region. China, the single largest consumer of Gulf oil on Earth, had its foreign ministry spokesperson issue a statement calling on all parties to immediately halt military operations. By Monday afternoon, the count stood at 7 countries asked, 0 countries committed, and a US president who admitted publicly that some nations were not enthusiastic while insisting, without naming them, that numerous countries were on their way. This is significant beyond a single day's headlines for one reason above all others. The US did not simply fail to assemble a coalition. The US asked countries to bear costs and risks for a war. It started without consulting them and discovered in public that they would not. Here is what most coverage is missing about this story. The alliance fracture you are watching this week is not a new crack. It is an old fault line exposed by this war in a way that cannot easily be repaired. To understand why the Allied refusals are so significant, you have to go back to the weeks before February 28th, when the US and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. Multiple Allied governments, European, Asian and Gulf, have since confirmed through diplomatic channels that they were given no advance notice of the strikes. Edward Fishman, director at the Council on Foreign Relations, told CNBC's Squawk Box Asia on Monday that the Trump administration did not consult allies in Europe or Asia before launching military action against Iran. Those allies, he noted, are much more dependent on Gulf oil imports than the United States is. They absorb the disruption of this war far more acutely than Washington does, and now they are being asked to provide the military infrastructure that makes the war sustainable. The historical parallel that sits directly underneath this story is 1956. The Suez Crisis. Britain and France, without consulting the United States, launched a military operation to seize control of the Suez Canal after Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized it. They assumed American support, or at minimum American acquiescence. What they got instead was an ultimatum from President Eisenhower to withdraw, backed by the threat of economic pressure. The operation collapsed, Britain's standing in the world, and the credibility of its independent military reach never fully recovered. What we are watching in 2026 is a structural mirror of that moment, but inverted. This time, it is the United States that launched a military operation in a critical waterway region without consulting its allies, and it is now demanding that those allies provide the naval escort infrastructure to make the operation's objectives achievable. The allies are not refusing because they do not care about the Strait of Hormuz. Japan, South Korea, and Germany are among the most energy-dependent advanced economies on Earth. They care deeply. They are refusing because they were not part of the decision that created the problem. They are now being asked to solve. Luxembourg's foreign minister said it plainly. Australia's minister confirmed Canberra had not even received a formal request. Germany asked for clarity on strategic goals that the US and Israel have never fully articulated publicly. The opposing interpretation of today's story is that Trump's coalition demand is a negotiating tactic, and that several countries will quietly commit to some form of involvement in the coming days, escort operations, mine clearing, intelligence sharing, without doing so publicly. The Wall Street Journal reported Monday that the US would soon announce a coalition of countries to escort ships through the strait, citing unnamed officials. Trump said himself that numerous countries had told him they were on their way and that some were already traveling. It is possible that a functional, if informal, coalition is being assembled beneath the surface of the public refusals. Here is why the evidence does not fully support that reading. The refusals were not quiet. Germany's foreign minister gave them to journalists in Brussels. Luxembourg's foreign minister used the word blackmail in an on-the-record statement. Japan's prime minister made her position in the Upper House Budget Committee, the most formal public venue in Japanese politics. These are not the kind of statements governments walk back in 48 hours. They are statements designed to signal to domestic audiences and to Tehran that these countries are not parties to this conflict. That signal has now been sent. Walking it back would carry its own political cost. And US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed on Monday that the US was allowing Iranian oil tankers to pass through the strait, a de facto acknowledgement that a full naval cordon is not currently in place, and that some level of practical accommodation with Iran's stated terms is already occurring. The EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, summed up the structural reality in a single sentence, telling Reuters on Monday, "Nobody is ready to put their people in harm's way in the Strait of Hormuz. We have to find diplomatic ways to keep this open." That statement, from the senior foreign policy voice of a 27-member bloc, is the most precise description of the coalition's actual status available. Not warships, diplomacy, and diplomacy has a different timeline than a naval escort operation. Now let us be direct about who gains and who loses from what happened in the last 48 hours. Iran gains the most. Tehran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said on Monday in an interview with CBS News, Face the Nation, that the strait is open from Iran's perspective. It is only closed to enemies. He said Iran is open to discussions with countries wanting safe passage. That is a diplomatic opening aimed directly at the countries that just refused Trump's coalition request. Iran is saying to Japan, South Korea, Germany and the EU, talk to us directly and your ships can move. Whether that offer is credible or tactical is a separate question. That it is being made at all, on the same day that US allies publicly declined to join an American naval coalition, is not a coincidence. China gains strategic positioning without firing a shot. Beijing can now approach Gulf states and Asian importers as a neutral party willing to discuss safe passage while Washington's coalition sits at 0 public members. The Chinese government mouthpiece Global Times published an opinion piece Monday asking, is this really about sharing responsibility, or is it about sharing the risk of a war that Washington started and cannot finish? That framing will resonate in capitals from Tokyo to New Delhi, regardless of whether one agrees with it. The EU gains internal coherence. European foreign ministers arrived in Brussels, divided on how to respond to Trump's demand. They left with a unified position, diplomatic engagement, not military participation. That unity, forged under American pressure, is itself a geopolitical outcome. The United States loses credibility on alliance management, specifically the credibility of the assumption that allies will join operations they were not consulted on. This is a durable loss, not a temporary one. Trump's "we will remember" carries real weight in alliance relationships. So does the fact that the demand was made without prior consultation, without shared intelligence on war aims, and without a clear statement of what success looks like. The Strait of Hormuz itself, and the global economy's access to it, remains the largest loser of the week. The first non-Iranian cargo transited the strait, with its automatic identification signal broadcasting on March 16th. A single Aframax tanker, the Karachi, carrying Abu Dhabi crude, one ship, in a waterway that normally handles 13 million barrels per day. That number captures where things actually stand. When no allied warships are coming, and diplomacy is the stated alternative, the oil market does exactly what you would expect. It counts the days. Brent crude is trading at approximately $103 per barrel on Tuesday morning, up more than 40% since the war began, from a pre-war level of around $72. WTI is at approximately $95. The level the market is watching is $100 on Brent, the psychological and structural threshold that was first crossed on March 12th when Khamenei's statement removed the ceasefire scenario from near-term pricing. Every day the Allied coalition stands at 0 public members is a day the Strait reopening timeline extends. What changes this direction is not more diplomacy. It is the first confirmed naval escort convoy moving successfully through the Strait with multiple nations' flags involved. That has not happened. Every source cited in this episode is publicly available. Check the Council on Foreign Relations. Check Al Jazeera's full transcript of the EU foreign ministers' meeting. Check the US Energy Information Administration's March 10th short-term energy outlook, which forecasts Brent above $95 for the next 2 months under the assumption of continued Strait disruption. In the southern Iranian city of Bandar Abbas, the port city that sits at the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz, the fishing community that has worked these waters for generations has not launched a boat in 18 days. The Reuters news agency reported this week that the fishing fleet, which supplies fish to markets across southern Iran and to export routes through the Gulf, is entirely idle. The boats are moored, the ice storage facilities are empty. The fishermen are waiting, not for a ceasefire, not for a coalition announcement from Washington, simply for a morning when the strait is safe enough to sail. They represent the smallest possible scale of what the closure of the world's most important waterway means in human terms, and they are among the millions of people in a dozen countries for whom this war is not a geopolitical abstraction, but a daily lived disruption. Watch the Federal Reserve. The FOMC meeting opened this morning, March 17th, and Chair Jerome Powell's press conference is scheduled for Wednesday, March 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The reason the Fed matters for this geopolitical story is direct. The inflation that the strait closure is generating gas nationally has risen more than 20% in a month to approximately $3.58 a gallon, has to be assessed by the most powerful central bank in the world in the context of a coalition that just publicly collapsed. A Fed that signals it will hold rates higher for longer due to energy-driven inflation is a Fed that is formally pricing in the duration of the conflict. That is a statement about how long the world expects the strait to stay closed. If Powell chooses hawkish language on Wednesday, it confirms what the zero-country coalition already implies. This war and its economic consequences are not measured in days. Tomorrow's episode will walk through the Fed statement line by line and explain what each phrase signals about how Washington's own central bank is reading the war's timeline and what that means for every country now choosing between the American coalition and the Iranian diplomatic channel, 0. That is the number of countries that said yes to Trump's warship demand, not because they do not care about the Strait of Hormuz, because they were not asked before the war started, and they were asked to pay for a decision they were not part of making. The strait remains closed, the coalition remains at zero, and the first country to publicly say yes will be answering a very different question than the one being asked on television. I'm James Harlow. This is The Right Chapter. It's never too late to get it right. Good night. Scenes. Sarah Nudge. Production notes. Episode word count. Approx 2,750 words. Live price data. Brent $103, 14 SAR. WTI $95, 20 March 17th morning. Pre-war Brent $72.48 plus 40% plus key market level $100 Brent. Psychological structural threshold. Hook number 0. Countries publicly committed to warship coalition. Geopolitical sources cited. Council on Foreign Relations. Edward Fishman, CNBC Squawk Box Asia. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas. Reuters interview. March 17th. Luxembourg FM. Xavier Bettel. Bloomberg News. March 16th. Germany FM. Johann Waderfall. Brussels Press Conference. March 16th. Japan PM. Sanae Takaichi. Upper House Budget Committee. March 16th. Australia Cabinet Minister. Catherine King. Press Statement. March 16th. UK PM Keir Starmer. Press Briefing. March 16th. Iran FM. Abbas Araghchi. CBS News. Face the Nation. March 16th. US Treasury Secretary. Scott Bessent. CNBC. March 17th. Wall Street Journal. Unnamed US officials. Coalition announcement. Marine traffic. Aframax tanker. Karachi. First non-Iranian AIS transit. Reuters. Bandar Abbas fishing fleet. March 2026. Financial sources cited. US Energy Information Administration. Short-term energy outlook. March 10th. Saul Kavonik. MSD Marquis, Head of Energy Research. CNBC. March 17th. AAA National Gas Price Index. Historical parallel. 1956. Suez Crisis. Britain/France versus Eisenhower. Tomorrow's trigger. Fed FOMC. Powell presser. March 18th. 2 p.m. ET. RCN. Suez.